Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to do something a little bit different in this deep dive. We're not exactly looking at a specific topic,
Oh.
but we are going to be looking at a very seasoned educator, and his name is Dr. Howie Knoff.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Knoff has been involved in education for decades.
Right.
He's the founder of Project Achieve Educational Solutions.
Yes.
And he's really been all over the country helping schools and districts improve.
Yeah, he's been a consultant and an author
Right.
and speaker and just done so many things.
And so we're not just going to be looking at like one particular topic, but kind of how his daily life experiences shape his view of education as a whole.
Yeah, and what's really neat about Dr. Knopf is that he really does walk the walk.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't just talk the talk.
Yeah.
You know, he takes these very mundane situations, like even a trip to the laundromat,
Right.
and turns them into these incredible learning opportunities that inform his work.
Let's talk about this laundromat scene. So he happens to be on a work trip and, is doing his laundry in a laundromat, kind of in a working class neighborhood.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of watching as he's waiting for his clothes. He's watching people.
Right.
And, sometimes you can't help but people watch, but he kind of takes it to another level.
Right.
And his school psychologist instincts kind of kick in.
That's
He's analyzing these little slices of life.
It's like he sees these everyday moments through this unique lens.
Right.
Right. He's not just watching.
Yeah.
He's thinking about these people's lives, and especially the children, and how their experiences outside of school are going to impact their learning and development.
So there are a couple of scenes that he describes that really stood out to me.
Okay.
One is that there's a young mother with a 3-year-old daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And, the little girl is exploring the laundromat and, touching everything.
Right. Just being a 3-year-old.
Being a 3-year-old, but the mom is just constantly on her, like yelling at her,
Right.
threatening her, screaming at her. And I'm just thinking, what struck you about that interaction?
Well, I think it's the intensity and consistency of the mother's reactions.
Yeah.
Dr. Knoff points out that this type of harsh discipline, especially when you're talking about a child that young, can have a significant impact on her development.
Oh, yeah.
Self-esteem, her ability to regulate her emotions.
Right.
Even her ability to form healthy relationships. And all of that's going to impact her readiness for school.
Right.
And her ability to learn.
It's a lot to unpack from just a laundromat encounter.
It is.
Makes you think like, gosh, what's going on in that mother's life that she's,
Exactly. And it reminds us that every child, every parent is walking into the classroom with a whole backstory, a whole set of experiences that shape who they are.
Right.
And sometimes those experiences create significant challenges for both the child and the teacher.
Then there's a homeless family.
Okay.
A mom and dad and 2 young girls, and they're living out of their car. And the dad is just completely engrossed in videos on his phone and just completely ignoring these 2 daughters who are very clearly trying to get his attention.
Yeah.
What did that scene raise for you as an expert?
Well, I think that definitely highlights the critical role of a stable and supportive home environment in a child's development. These girls are not only lacking basic necessities, but they're missing out on those crucial interactions with a caring adult to help them to learn and grow. And witnessing their father's disengagement, can also model unhealthy relationship patterns that they might carry into their own lives.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
It's not just about like having a roof over your head. It's about having those emotional connections, that sense of security that allows a child to thrive.
Right.
And, schools can try to fill some of those gaps, but it's such an uphill battle when those basic needs aren't being met at home.
Absolutely. It underscores the need for a more holistic approach to education, one that recognizes that interconnectedness of a child's social, emotional, and academic well-being.
Right.
And it reminds us that schools can't do it alone.
Yeah.
They need the support of families, communities, and social services to truly make a difference.
He also observed an older woman with her adult daughter who has some cognitive challenges.
Right.
And it was clear that the daughter needed quite a bit of help with even simple tasks.
Yeah.
And it made Dr. Knoff wonder, like, what kind of support system
Right.
does she even have in place?
That's a good question. And I think that observation really highlights the gaps in our support system for individuals with disabilities.
Yeah.
Particularly when they transition out of the school system.
Right.
The focus is often so much on academics, and there's not enough emphasis on those life skills that are crucial for independence and successful integration into the community.
You know, it's funny. I never thought of a laundromat as like, you know, a place for social commentary.
Right.
But Dr. Knoff manages to extract all these profound insights from these everyday encounters.
He does.
Like he can't turn off his educator brain even when he's doing laundry.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes his perspective so valuable.
Yeah.
He's not just sitting in an ivory tower, you know, theorizing about education.
Right.
He's out in the real world, observing, interacting, and letting those experiences inform his work.
And it reminds us that, you know, we can all do the same. We can all be a little more observant, a little more aware of the challenges that people are facing, and more willing to kind of connect those challenges to the bigger picture.
Absolutely. We all have something to learn from Dr. Knoff's approach.
Yeah.
It's about opening our eyes to the stories all around us and recognizing that every individual, every family has a unique journey that shapes who they are and how they learn.
So we've seen how Dr. Knoff's observations in the laundromat reveal this profound awareness of the social and emotional baggage that students can bring into the classroom. But how does this awareness translate into his professional work?
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Knoff also works as an expert witness in special education law.
Wow.
A field where understanding a child's whole story becomes absolutely critical.
It makes sense.
Because the stakes are so high.
And it's not just, you know, legal knowledge he's applying.
Right.
He's bringing that deep understanding of the human side of education to these really complex cases.
And he doesn't shy away from, you know, tough cases either.
Right.
He really takes on cases based on merit. Meaning he could be supporting the school district.
Right.
Or he could be supporting the student and their family.
It depends on the situation.
It depends on the situation. He's not automatically on one side or the other.
Exactly.
He's really looking for what's best for the child within, you know, the complexities of the law.
That's so important, especially in special ed law, where those lines can be so blurry.
Right.
And the emotions run so high.
Yeah.
His willingness to look at all sides really makes his insights, you know, all the more valuable.
So he talks about a case involving a student with autism who exhibited really dangerous behaviors towards both staff and other students. And so the big question was, you know, are these actions like intentional acts of defiance, or are they a result of his disability?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
And how do you handle that?
Right. That's where that technical side of education law really comes into play.
Yeah.
You know, this case touches on this really important concept called manifestation determination.
Right.
And it's basically a process where the team has to figure out if a student's behavior is directly related to their disability.
Right.
And the outcome of that determination has huge implications for what supports and interventions the school is legally required to provide.
So it's not just about punishing a student for bad behavior.
Exactly.
It's about understanding why they're behaving that way.
That's right.
And coming up with a plan that addresses their individual needs, but also, you know, keeps everyone safe.
Absolutely. And it requires such a deep understanding of special education law.
Right.
And the nuances of different disabilities.
Yeah.
It's not an easy process.
No.
And this case really highlights the need for, you know, experienced professionals who can really navigate those complexities effectively.
He also mentioned a case where a student with autism and intellectual disabilities was essentially stuck at home for over a year.
Wow.
Because the school district couldn't find a one-on-one aide.
Oh, gosh.
For her.
Can you even imagine missing out on an entire year of school because of a lack of resources?
It's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. And sadly, it's something that plays out far too often.
I know.
Especially in districts with limited funding.
Right.
And, you know, this case really highlights the very real resource constraints that schools are facing and how those constraints can have really devastating consequences for students with disabilities.
Oh. And it also points to the critical role of special education advocates and attorneys.
Absolutely.
Who can really fight for these students' rights and make sure they are receiving the services that they need.
Parents often feel so overwhelmed and lost when they're trying to navigate special ed.
I know.
And having that strong advocate on their side can make all the difference.
And the last legal case that he discussed involves a student who may have had a misdiagnosed head injury as a toddler.
Wow.
And this led to a whole bunch of different developmental challenges and questions about whether she actually had autism or a communication disorder or what exactly was going on.
This case really underscores the importance of accurate diagnosis and early intervention.
Yes.
If that head injury had been properly identified and treated, it's possible that some of those later challenges could have been prevented. Or at least minimized. And it also highlights the interconnectedness of different areas of development. How a physical injury can have this ripple effect on a child's language, social skills, and overall learning.
It seems like a common thread through all of these cases is the need for collaboration between, educators, psychologists, speech pathologists, medical doctors, to really get a comprehensive picture of what's going on.
And Dr. Knoff argues that schools need these really experienced multidisciplinary teams. Particularly when we're talking about supporting students with autism. And he believes that, school psychologists and speech-language pathologists have a particularly important role to play. Because they understand how communication and behavior and those neurological factors all intersect.
He's not just looking at the surface behavior. He's really digging deeper to understand the underlying reasons why a child might be struggling.
And he talks about this concept called functional behavior assessment. And it's basically a process where you're trying to figure out the purpose behind a child's behavior. What need are they trying to meet with this behavior? Is it to get attention, escape a task, or gain access to something they want? And Dr. Knoff argues that, sometimes with autism, the function of the behavior might be more complex. It might be tied to sensory sensitivities, communication difficulties, or even, differences in how their brains process information.
It's really fascinating how he brings together, his observations from the laundromat with his experiences, in these complex legal cases. It's like he's constantly connecting the dots. Seeing how these seemingly disparate experiences all contribute to a deeper understanding of the challenges that students and educators are facing.
And it's not just about theory for Dr. Knoff. He takes this knowledge and he applies it to his work with real schools and districts. Speaking of which, are you ready to kind of shift gears and explore his work with this rural school district that was really grappling with learning loss?
Let's do it.
Okay.
This is where I think Dr. Knoff's boots-on-the-ground approach really shines through.
He travels to this small rural school district, fewer than 500 students, limited resources, serving a high-needs population. And he immediately sees that, the reality of learning loss isn't just about catching kids up on academics.
It's about understanding the context, the social and emotional factors that are, inseparable from a child's ability to learn.
He paints such a vivid picture of this community. Poverty, drug use, high number of students with disabilities, teacher burnout. These were challenges that existed before the pandemic. But they were just amplified during those school closures and disruptions.
And as if those challenges weren't enough. The school is dealing with a severe shortage of teachers. Especially substitute teachers.
That's a big one.
And they are just stretched so thin.
I can imagine.
Trying to keep their heads above water.
We hear so much about learning loss in the national media. But Dr. Knoff's observations really challenge that simplistic narrative. That it's purely an academic problem that we can fix with more tutoring or extra homework. He's arguing that we need to look beyond the test scores and see the whole child, the whole community, to truly understand the impact of the pandemic and those systemic inequities that were exacerbated by it.
It's a powerful reminder.
It is.
That education doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Absolutely.
It's influenced by so many factors outside of the classroom. A child's home life, their community, the resources available to their school.
And in a situation like this rural school district, where those external factors are so challenging, it makes you question, what does success even look like?
It does.
Can we realistically hold these schools to the same standards as more affluent districts? that have so many more resources and fewer social challenges.
It's a question worth pondering.
It is.
And it reminds us that sometimes success is about recognizing the effort.
Right.
The dedication of those educators who are showing up every day despite the obstacles and doing their absolute best for their students. Yeah, it really makes you appreciate, the resilience of these educators.
It's truly inspiring.
Doesn't it?
And it really speaks to the dedication of so many teachers across the country who are working in these circumstances.
Yeah.
They're not just teaching academics. They're providing emotional support. They're mentors.
Yeah.
They're acting as surrogate parents in some cases.
And Dr. Knoff doesn't sugarcoat the situation either.
Right.
He talks about the toll that these challenges take on teachers, the burnout, the stress.
The feeling of being overwhelmed. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, we can't expect teachers to pour from an empty cup.
Right.
We have to invest in their well-being.
Yeah.
We have to provide them with adequate resources and support and create a system that really values their expertise and contributions.
He also points out that, addressing these challenges isn't just the responsibility of schools.
Oh, absolutely not.
It requires a collective effort.
It does.
From families, communities, and policymakers.
It's about creating this web of support
Yeah.
that surrounds these students and gives them the best possible chance to succeed.
So what can we as individuals do to make a difference?
Well, Dr. Knoff doesn't give us like this prescriptive list.
Right.
But he really encourages us to be more than just observers.
Yeah.
He challenges us to get involved, to be part of the solution.
Right.
It could be something as simple as volunteering in a classroom, mentoring a student, or even just having a conversation with a teacher about what they're experiencing. Those small acts of kindness and support can really have a ripple effect.
I'm also thinking about how we can advocate for policies that address the root causes of some of these challenges.
Absolutely.
The poverty, lack of access to quality health care, inadequate funding for schools.
All those things.
Yeah. We can contact our elected officials.
Right.
We can support organizations that are working to improve education. Use our voices to speak up.
That's right.
For those who are marginalized and overlooked.
Those are all great ideas.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that change doesn't happen overnight.
No.
It takes time.
Yeah.
It takes persistence.
It does.
And it takes a willingness to work together. But I think Dr. Knoff's message is ultimately one of hope.
Right.
He sees the potential for positive change.
Yeah.
But he recognizes that it requires all of us to step up and do our part.
I love that it's not about waiting for someone else to fix things.
Right.
It's about taking ownership and recognizing that we all have a role to play.
And maybe that's the most important lesson that we can learn from this deep dive into Dr. Knoff's world. It's a call to action, an invitation to look beyond the headlines, to see the human stories behind the statistics, to be more observant, more empathetic, and more engaged in creating a more just and equitable education system for all.
Well said. Well, that wraps up our exploration of Dr. Howie Knoff's unique perspective on education.
Yes, it does.
We hope this conversation has given you some food for thought and inspired you to take action in your own communities.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.